Hey guys, Fazan here, live from Wimbledon 2024.
Alongside Liam, and we've been here on the women's semi-finals day, and we've got a great podcast coming in for you guys.
Yes, we do. We're going to be talking about the men's semi-finals, so previewing that, and of course, two blockbuster affairs. We've got Carlos Alcaraz versus Daniel Medvedev, and Novak Djokovic versus Lorenzo Musetti, a bit of a surprise package. Before we get into it in detail, I wanted to ask you, Liam, actually, what do you think about the lineup? And I'm assuming you're surprised about Musetti, but maybe you're not.
Well, I mean, if you told me that the Italian male in the semi-finals at Wimbledon this year would have been Musetti at the start of the tournament, I would have probably laughed in your face. But he has played so well in the run-up here. Obviously, he's played well in Stuttgart, well in Queens, and it's just translated here onto the grass as well. I was worried for him when he was coming up against Pericard. I thought maybe there would be a little bit of an issue just because of how Pericard was been serving, but the fact that he had played him already in Stuttgart and managed to come through that one in quicker conditions, obviously because the grass court conditions here at Wimbledon are a little bit slower than perhaps other tournaments on grass. I think that helped him a lot and in his confidence. And to be honest, the way he beat Taylor Fritz in that quarterfinal matchup was nothing short of spectacular. I think the way he managed to adapt, and he even said it after his match to everyone, that he wasn't trying to keep things similar. He didn't want to play Taylor's game. He didn't want to continue giving him flat shots. He wanted to vary it up, slice, loopy balls, flat balls, just keep Taylor guessing and not give him any rhythm. And that really worked for him well coming into the semi-finals.
Yeah, 100%. And he's very well spoken, I think, in the presses and gives nice long answers and very thoughtful. And I think we can probably touch upon the presses as we get past, well, get to each player even. We'll talk about Alcaraz and Medvedev first, or Medvedev. And both guys are very good in the press conferences. I think Medvedev is probably our favourite. He's my favourite anyway. In the press, is very funny guy. But on the tennis side, of course, the head-to-head, I think you have it's 4-2. And any notes on the head-to-head?
I think the head-to-head between Alcaraz and Medvedev stands out to me because, of course, I mean, you look at the first match that they ever played, you can't really count that match. I realistically, I don't think you can look at that match. So realistically, the head-to-head should already be, 4-1. Just because Alcaraz had never really played on grass before, it's not really his It wasn't really his surface at the time, and Medvedev obviously a much more experienced player at that time. But if you look at it since that match, of course, Alcaraz played extremely well in their early matches that they played, but then they played last year in this exact moment in the semi-finals where Alcaraz completely dominated Medvedev from start to finish, winning in straight sets. And we thought the same was going to happen going into the US Open semi-final, where Alcaraz was the defending champion, sort of a similar situation to what we have now here at Wimbledon. And then Medvedev just came out of nowhere and just absolutely destroyed him in 4 sets, didn't allow Alcaraz to play his game at all on a surface which really suits Alcaraz's game perhaps more than grass courts. But since then, Alcaraz has really sort of put his foot down on Medvedev. They played at the ATP finals in the round robin, and Alcaraz really dominated that match in straight sets. And then as well in Indian Wells, similar to the final in Indian Wells the year prior, where Alcaraz also dominated in straight sets. I think Alcaraz should usually win most matches against Daniil just based on the variety in his game that he has. He can push Daniil back. Daniil already stands quite far back into the court anyways. Alcaraz can push him even further back, and then he can also switch it up and try and bring him in through the drop shot. And if Daniil is lucky enough to get to that drop shot, Alcaraz has so many different types of ways that he can pass you. The amazing lob, amazing backhand down the line, amazing backhand cross court, forehand, can do anything that he wants with it. He's just great in all aspects. So I think that's really going to have to be his game plan. But if he is to do that, he needs to be serving well from the get-go. You were watching, obviously, Alcaraz and Tommy Paul playing in person. What did you think of Alcaraz's serve?
Yeah, so Alcaraz against Tommy Paul, I think he turned it on in the last couple of sets and started to find his spots, and that's going to be really key, I think. And Medvedev against, in his last couple of matches, especially his last one, he started altering his return position. I think you obviously watched him and you mentioned, and I was messaging you when you were in the court saying, look, what's he doing on return? And you said he's not quite on the back fence as he normally is, 4 or 5 meters behind the baseline. He's not hugging the baseline either, which I don't think we expect. He's probably around 2 meters behind the baseline, and that was, of course, against Yannick Sinner. I think Sinner arguably has a better serve than Alcaraz. So if Medvedev was able to get into the Sinner service games like he was, then he probably has a good chance against Alcaraz. The only difference might be is that Alcaraz is not afraid to come and serve and volley. And I'm not saying Sinner is, but he's not as, he doesn't use it as frequently, I think it's fair to say. And Alcaraz is definitely much more natural at the net, got great hands, and I think it'll be interesting to see whether he does utilise that if Medvedev isn't super far back, because obviously that opens him up. And Medvedev has this really uncanny ability to hit really precise, low, just low shots over the net. We're not just low shots over the net, but with extreme depth as well. And they're almost, I would say, sniper-like shots. And he's one of the only players on tour who's able to stand 5 meters behind the baseline and still, hit within half a meter from the baseline in terms of depth. And he doesn't just hit a loopy, we were talking about Musetti earlier, which shaped kind of forehand into play. He rushes you and hits it super flat. And he's so consistent with it. So we know what he's able to do and what he's going to do. And I know he mentioned in the press conference after the Sinner win, look, maybe I'll try and do something different against Alcaraz and, be a bit more aggressive. And I think we know how he plays. He can alter his return position. He can try and be a bit more aggressive on the forehand, but there's probably only so much he can do. As you said, with the variety that Alcaraz brings, is probably in his hands, but he is going to have to play well. And I think the one thing that he's going to have to do is, yes, one, serve well, but two, he's going to have to make sure that the rallies don't get long and he dictates. And that's going to be really key. And one of the areas, and you can tell me what you think of this, I think that's going to be key, is the backhand to backhand or the ad court exchange. And in a lot of matches, I tend to say that almost decides a lot of matches. And I especially with this one, because Medvedev's backhand is so solid that Alcaraz in the past has had issues with not necessarily just Medvedev, but Sinner, Zverev, Djokovic. All these guys have got one thing in common, and that's a phenomenally good two-handed backhand. They're top 5 in the world in terms of quality of backhand, and Medvedev is up there. So it's something that Alcaraz will have to battle, and whether that's use the backhand slice for variation to get out of that, whether that's dictating, going line first, whatever it might be. But it's going to be really key, I think, for that. What do you think in terms of keys are for Alcaraz and Medvedev? What might play out on court tomorrow?
I think realistically, the key, let's start off with Medvedev. The key for Medvedev is to serve well the entire match. He cannot afford to lower the pace on the serve or stay away from trying to go for the lines. Against Sinner, he hit, I think, 11 double faults. But as I've said before, it's not something I was really worried about in terms of his performance against Sinner, because those double faults came at really, I would say, random moments. 30 love up in a sort of 3-all game or something like that. Nothing too crazy. But he was serving extremely well, I found, on the first. Against Alcaraz, he's going to have to serve a lot better. I think Sinner obviously is a great returner. One of the best returners in the game. As you said, he's got that amazing backhand that allows him to sort of get into a lot more games than perhaps other players would do. But also Sinner would, I think, give sometimes a lot of neutral balls back to Medvedev. He wouldn't attack him too far behind the baseline right off the first shot, whilst Alcaraz, if he gets something that's a little bit slower, a little bit off pace, a little bit away from the line, he will punish you right from the start. And Medvedev can't afford to take anything off of his serve here. We've spoken to him in the presses earlier this week and last week and asked about his shoulder. He says everything's fine, and it seems to be fine. I mean, there don't seem to be any signs of any pain or anything like that. You never know. So that would really be the key for this match in terms of Medvedev's side of things. If I'm now moving on to Alcaraz, I think he would obviously like for this match to be played with the roof open.
Exactly, yeah.
We don't know exactly how it's going to pan out on Friday. The weather forecast looks a bit mixed. I mean, Thursday's been a great day in terms of the sun, and now the rains come out in the evening, so you really don't know how the British summer's going to play out. If the roof does close, it will help Medvedev a lot more.
100%.
Will it help him a lot more in terms of actually winning the match in the grand scheme of things? I'm not too sure, because Alcaraz, I think even last year the match was played with a roof closed. I can't remember, to be honest, exactly, but I believe it was, and Alcaraz completely destroyed him in that match.
Yeah,
so,
it was, yeah.
Yeah, so it's something that it has to be in Alcaraz's mind that he has to sort of play a little bit faster, a little bit flatter, and expect a lot more flatter shots, especially on the backhand side from Daniil. But in my opinion, Alcaraz's game is really dependent on how well Daniil plays, and Medvedev. The match is in Medvedev's hands to decide if he wins or loses, rather than Alcaraz, because Alcaraz, I think, will be consistent throughout and bring his game. Whether Medvedev is able to keep up with him is the key for me.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because I think obviously you're saying that the match is ultimately, if Medvedev plays a high enough level, he can win it. I think is what you're saying. If he serves extremely well, then he's got a chance. I actually think it might be in Alcaraz's hands, but it probably brings me on to the Tommy Paul presser that we had, and he talked about first strike tennis. And
As well.
yeah, and you mentioned that right earlier. You said that Alcaraz punishes you when you have something short, and from the very first shot, if your ball quality is not good enough, he will attack. And that's exactly what Tommy Paul said. He said, look, in the third and fourth sets, he played better first strike tennis. So whether that's from the serve, the return, the +1 shot off the serve or return, he was just relentless, and he was attacking with really good fluidity throughout those two sets. And that's something that Medvedev, I'm sure, will look at and think, okay, if I keep on bashing the ball back at Alcaraz, is it just going to come back harder and harder? Because I was watching the match against Tommy Paul, and they played some fantastic points. And Tommy Paul definitely is someone who physically can challenge Alcaraz. But what happened is it got to a point where Tommy Paul plateaued, and Alcaraz got used to it. He got used to the ball quality, the movement, the speed, and he just took it up a notch. And he started to dominate and started to push forward onto the baseline. That's going to be really key as well. You were talking earlier about, he can push back Medvedev. He can't allow Medvedev to push him back behind the baseline, because Medvedev will then start to open up angles. We've started to see Medvedev start to actually utilize a drop shot, for example, which is really interesting. And of course, there's the infamous Medvedev, which is fantastic because he's actually coming forward at times, which is really important, I think, on grass. And no one's saying he needs to serve a volley, but if it's there, then he should utilize it. And you made a good point with Alcaraz about the drop shots and the lobs, right? So if he is going to come forward, then he needs to be really careful what he does, because if his approach isn't good enough, if his volleys aren't good enough, Alcaraz will pick him off at the net and he'll be a sitting duck. So really important that Alcaraz is, that Medvedev even is really selective about when he does use that, variation of coming forward, of using those certain angles, because as you said, Alcaraz has got so many weapons. In terms of prediction then, what are you thinking? And we haven't really gone through, I guess, the matches so far, but I think we can quickly touch upon that maybe very, very briefly. Obviously TFO was the one that Alcaraz struggled with, 5-setter there. For Medvedev, it was a sinner match, not really much else, to be fair. A couple of sets dropped here and there, but nothing huge, I would say. In terms of prediction, what were you going to go for in terms of winner, and in how many sets do you think?
Yeah, Alcaraz, I think, has had, obviously, I would say up until the quarterfinal, had the tougher draw. But Medvedev's beaten the world number one, and only 4 people have done that so far this year. So realistically, Medvedev is looking really good based on that. But as I said, I was talking earlier and I said that it's in Medvedev's hands really how this match goes. It wasn't really saying Medvedev decides whether he wins this match. It's more saying this match and how tight Medvedev can keep it is in his hands. I still think, in my opinion, Alcaraz comes through this one. I think Alcaraz books himself into another final here at Wimbledon and goes for his title defense. It's the question of how many sets. Realistically, I think it's going to be tighter than last year's match. Last year, I think Medvedev was quite shocked at the level that Alcaraz was able to bring on grass. I don't think he was expecting it. This year, especially off the back of the ATP finals and the Indian Wells matches, he knows what to expect. He'll be a little bit more prepared, and he'll be riding that confidence from that win against Jannik Sinner. So I think he'll be able to snatch a set out of this, but I think that's realistically the max I'm thinking. So I'm thinking Alcaraz gets himself into the final by meeting Medvedev in 4 sets. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's a very sensible prediction. I don't tend to give sensible predictions, to be fair, but normally in draw previews, so actually match previews I can tend to be a bit better. But yeah, I think that's probably the way that I can see it going. I think, you mentioned about Medvedev's serve. I just think it's so key. If he has a really big serving day, it can be tough for Alcaraz, especially with the roof's closed as well, which it's looking likely that the roof will be closed. But yeah, I mean, obviously Alcaraz has won the last two. Yes, Medvedev beat him at the US Open, but the question is going to be, right, he lost to Alcaraz at Wimbledon, and then he learned something from it, and then he beat him at the US Open. Has he learned something from the ATP Finals and the Indian Wells match? He is arguably, in my opinion, apart from maybe Djokovic, the most intelligent player I think on tour. If you hear him speak, I mean, look at what he's got at his disposal and like he's been the number one, and you wouldn't expect like the attributes that he has to come out. And that's no offense to him. I think it just proves though how intelligent he is, how he utilizes his skill set. But I think I'm going to go with Alcaraz as well. I'm going to go for a 5-set thriller. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. But I'm hoping for a good match. Obviously, hopefully one of us will one of us will be on court. But looking forward to it, and I think it'll be a good one. We can divert attention to, of course, the second one, which...
Yeah, I think the second one, Djokovic against Musetti. I mean, I'm quite interested in getting your opinion on this one. I really haven't watched Djokovic in person too much this week. I've seen, obviously, the matches on TV, so I wanted to really understand from your perspective, how has he been moving? I've watched him practice today. I've seen him play against Nick. He's looking very good, but I think you've seen him more than me over this fortnight. So what would you say has impressed you the most from Novak?
I think it's more the recovery from the knee surgery, and obviously it wasn't a major surgery, but the fact that he's come back so quickly and playing the way that he is a testament, I guess, to his conditioning and also just his recovery generally. But it's been pretty straightforward for him, right? Like no real hiccups, a couple of sets dropped, but that tends to be the case with him towards the latter stage of his career. He'll drop a set here or there, and it's not really a big deal. He tends to come through it okay. The Rune match, I managed to watch the back end of it in person, and I was watching it on the screen anyway. But I mean, Rune definitely didn't put his best foot forward. Let's say that it wasn't a great showing from the Dane, but Novak was just clinical, played really well, and of course, it was a good night for him, for sure. But look, I mean, the crowd, the crowd comment after was interesting. But that aside, I think he's playing really well. And honestly, the De Minaur withdrawal, I think, is actually in his favour because it's meant that he's had time to rest the knee. And you saw him today. We both saw him today. He wasn't wearing the knee brace, which I think is a real positive. I don't know, did he play with it?
So when we saw him originally before you had to head off, he wasn't wearing the knee brace coming into his warm-up with his team and all that stuff. But then he did actually put it on for the practice session. I think it's more of a precautionary, sort of also perhaps a little mental edge thing. In the practice session itself, I mean, he was practicing... Well, Nick was practicing with Stefan for about half an hour. Then Novak came on court, so Stefan got booted off to play with another kid on another court. And they started off, relatively chilled in terms of just, going through the motions. But then they started playing points and serves and sort of just getting into rallies. And that's when I think it looked very good, in my opinion. Novak was running side to side, up and down. Nick was tired of Novak. Nick at a certain point stopped the practice and said, Novak, let's have a drink, because they had been rallying for like 5 minutes straight without missing a ball. And that just shows you that Novak is in amazing shape for his age. He's definitely, I think he's having a second wind in sort of his career in terms of not the fact of his performances, perhaps you look at this year hasn't been that great, but in terms of his confidence in his own game, especially, he looked down and out after the French. Everyone was writing him off for everything. And the way he's come here at Wimbledon, I think is giving him a second wind in the fact that, I'm still here. I'm still the guy to beat. So come at me and see if you're going to have a good night. I don't think so, but it's going to be quite interesting. I think it's that, like you said, the De Minaur withdrawal definitely gave him a little bit more time to sort of get himself to grips with his injury, you would say, or even just his recovery. What do you think realistically going into this semi-final? Let's move on to Musetti. What have you been most impressed by Musetti by?
Yeah, Musetti. I mean, actually, before I move on to Musetti, you talked about Djokovic having a second wind, and I just wanted to mention that actually 2 years ago, the way that he won the title was by serving really well.
Hmm.
And that's exactly what he's been doing this year. I think that's a telltale sign that, it's not surprising that he's made this stage. And his route as well, I think we had to be fair. He has been in the easier side of the draw.
Yeah.
It's been an easier half, no doubt about that, I think. And of course, people like her catch falling, etc., that's definitely been to his advantage. For Musetti, I mean, look, it's been a surprise package. Let's be honest. I mean, he is the surprise package. As you said, we could have easily said, look, Sinner, Berrettini would have put them above him in terms of potentials to make the semi-final. And he's seen as a clay quarter, that's for sure. But the fact that he's made a semi-final here at Wimbledon on grass is really impressive. And look, he had really good form coming into it, had a decent run in the Stuttgart final of Queens as well, lost to Tommy Paul in a tight two-set affair there. His route hasn't been super tough, let's be fair, of course. I mean, look, Lestienne dropped one set there, Darderi dropped two sets there, and then you've also got Comersana. These players are not players that you think, okay, look, they're really tough. And then, of course, he did have Pericard, who, look, I watched him in qualifying. He's got a monster serve. So I think the most impressive thing in that match for me from Musetti was his returning, because it's not necessarily something that I attribute to his game, especially on grass. But look, he was really good against someone who's, served 100 plus aces going into that match in the tournament, and also serving, I think it was on average, he was serving at 120 mile per hour second serve. So, I mean, that's just ridiculous. And serving aces, just consistently even on that. So, Musetti was really, really impressive. And the one thing that he did really well against Pericard and Fritz was being able to take over with the forehand. That's exactly what he did against Fritz. He took over beautifully, dominated with that. And then you mentioned it earlier about Musetti at the start of the pod. You said, look, he made it difficult for Fritz in the outdoor conditions by shaping it, by chipping it, by making him move around. And we know that Fritz, is maybe not the most athletic on tour. He gets the most out of his game, but in terms of movement, he probably doesn't move the best out of, we wouldn't put him in the top 10 movers, I don't think, on tour. Djokovic is arguably at 1, right? Yeah. So, you might put Alcaraz and Sinner above him now potentially at his age, but he's there, right? So Musetti can't chip it and just shape it to Djokovic. He might have some success, but especially with the roof closed, the question is going to be, what weapons does he have to hurt Djokovic? And that's what I'm not sure about. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Listen, I think before we do our predictions for this one, I'm going to give you the inside scoop of inside scoops. Whilst you were having your lunch, going to watch your match, I was listening. I had my ear open to the court, to the practice court. Djokovic against Kyrgios. Kyrgios kept asking Djokovic questions. How do you want me to play this? Do you want me to play it a la Kyrgios or a la Musetti?
Okay.
And Djokovic wanted it a la Musetti. So Nick was varying it up. He wasn't playing the Nick that we usually know. Yeah. He was playing Nick who was slicing it a lot. Yeah. Loopy balls. Every sort of shot that you could imagine, it was different to the first one. So they were practicing specifically for this match. And Djokovic, I mean, he's known for studying his opponent's tactics to the T. He knows his opponents. There's not a player who can beat Rafa Nadal in straight sets in an Australian Open final perfectly like he did in 2019 that just does that based on feel on the day. You study these things, you prepare for these things. And I think, to be honest, he's learned as well from that win that he had at 3 a.m. in the morning against Musetti in Paris, and he's learnt as well from how Musetti's been playing here on the grass. I reckon Djokovic is all over this match. I reckon he's got the game to adapt. You said Fritz might not be in the top 10 movers. Djokovic, as you said, is arguably the best mover of all time on tour, and specifically on a grass court as well. It's very specific. It's a very specific type of athleticism you need to move well on grass, and especially to slide on grass.
He's the only one, right? Him and Sinner. Sinner is the only one that can do it apart from Djokovic, and it must be to do with the skiing, because both those guys ski really well. But it's phenomenal that he's able to slide on it, and Look, I mean, I don't know how he does it because all the other players, I think, if they did it, they get injured. So, the way that he just slides like as a clay court is just like phenomenal, in all honesty. And even with obviously the knee, he's still doing it, and he seems fine.
Yeah, no, exactly. And let's quickly touch upon, the draws. You mentioned the draws, and Djokovic has had perhaps the easier draw that you would say for a number 2 seed. But he's still, I think he's had a tougher draw than Musetti has had.
Yes, 100%.
And if you're looking at Musetti's draw and talking about specifically sliding, I don't think he's had to play players who make him slide. Djokovic is going to make Musetti slide. I mean, Lestienne, Darderi, Comisana, Pericard, Fritz, they're not going to make you slide on a grass court. They're going to make you hit, tennis that is quite rhythmic. Pericard obviously won't give you that much rhythm, but if you're returning well his serve and you get him into the rally, it's not going to be, lights out tennis from the baseline. Pericard's obviously a great baseliner for a 6'8" guy, but is he as good of a baseliner as a Taylor Fritz or a Novak Djokovic? Not too sure. Would highly doubt it. So I think Djokovic has had the tougher route. He can definitely move better than Musetti on this surface. He is studying his opponents, as I saw today at the practice session. I reckon my prediction is going to be Djokovic to win this in 3 sets. Could definitely go to 4, but I think if Djokovic starts the match, it all depends. Musetti, if he's going to win a set, it's going to be one of the first 2. If he doesn't win one of the first 2 sets, I don't think he's going to win any sets going forward. That's his best chance to get anything going against Novak, because if Novak raises his level throughout the match usually. He starts off at the lowest and he raises it up as he goes on. So in my opinion, if Novak gets the first 2 sets, it's 3 sets. If Musetti manages to nab a set, it'll still be 4 sets. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think Musetti might take the first set. Might be a tight one, could be a tiebreaker, it could be a 6-4. And then I think after that, Djokovic will take over. I think he'll get used to it. And, he tends to ease himself in, as you said. There was that infamous, obviously, 2021 US Open run where I think he lost the first in every single match leading up to the final. And obviously lost the final. Would he have lost it if it wasn't for the the career Grand Slam? Or the Canada Slam even. I don't know. But either way, that he's known for potentially at the start, especially if it's against a player who he either hasn't played against or he hasn't played against on a specific surface. Sometimes it takes him a little bit of time to get used to it. But then he's almost, he kind of calculates like a computer, and then he gets his game plan, and then as soon as he's got his game plan, he hits execute, and then that's it. Goes into overdrive and just takes out the opponent. So yeah, maybe a set, as you said. Musetti, I'm just trying to think about what he can do against Djokovic tactically. I think you talked about variation. I think that's going to be really key against Djokovic. Djokovic, the one thing I will say is that for him, like the slice is really important cross court against Djokovic, and utilizing, as long as he is knifing that, he will get some success. I'm not saying that he's going to hit winners off it or he's even going to induce errors, but what he might be able to do is neutralize the Djokovic backhand at times. Because Djokovic, think about it, even someone as athletic as him, he has hit a backhand down at his ankles. He can't hurt you with that. He can't. It's impossible. And what he might be able to do is then get Djokovic to hit a neutral ball, which he can then attack with his forehand. But then he needs to really be on top of that every time. As soon as he gets an opportunity to attack, we talked about Alcaraz earlier, it has to be quality. It has to be quality behind those ground strokes. It can't be half measures. It can't be 75%. It needs to be top standard in terms of baseline quality throughout most of the rallies. Otherwise, Djokovic will neutralize him straight away and then get on the front foot, because that's what he's so good at doing. He'll just hit a deep ball into, it doesn't even need to the corner, down the middle, neutralizes straight away. And he's done that throughout his whole career. And now he's got the weapons, right? As he's gotten older, he'll be more offensive on the forehand. He'll go for more on it, and he'll come to the net. He'll kill you in so many different ways. So Musetti needs to try and make Djokovic feel uncomfortable. How do you do that? It's difficult at times. You can't do what some guys do on clay. You hit a massive kick serve into his backhand. We know at times he's had issues, above shoulder height, being able to attack that return. Musetti's going to have to hit spots on serve. High first serve percentage, around 65-70% plus. Needs to serve well. Needs to read the Djokovic serve well. Try and get into the return games. Put him under some pressure. And then in the baseline exchanges, he can't be getting into longer rallies. He needs to shorten the points. Actually got very good hands in the net, Musetti. He really does. So he can be selective when he comes in. Like Alcaraz, though, if you come in against Djokovic, you better be damn sure that the approach shot's good, or he's going to get picked off. And at times, he's going to have to accept that, look, I'm just going to get past. Because at times, it will happen. But as long as he's done the right thing, then fine. Sometimes it's too good. But he's got to be brave, I think, is really the crux of the matter. If he's not brave, he'll lose easily. So he needs to take risks, and then we'll see where he goes from there. But he's got nothing to lose, really. No one's expecting him to win, I don't think. So sometimes that's a really positive thing. You can go into it with just a clear head, no expectations, no pressure. Go out there and play your best tennis. So let's see how he does. But yeah, that's all on the men's. Should we just wrap up, because we've got a little bit of time? Wrap up about today.
Yeah.
So we can talk about today. So obviously the women's semi-finals were both actually, well, pretty good in the end. 2-3 set matches. And look, I mean, do you want to touch upon Krejcikova and Rebecca? Rebecca obviously was a heavy favourite going into it. And Krejcikova came out on top. And were you surprised by that? You're watching on court.
I mean, yeah, I think I was very surprised by that. I mean, I watched both of Krejcikova's matches. Obviously, I watched the quarterfinal and I've watched the semi-final now, back-to-back days. And honestly, I thought, the quarterfinal, she played very well. Ostapenko, I think, also threw a lot of 3 points her way. So I wasn't expecting too much from Krejcikova going into the semi-final against Rebecca. But Rebecca started the match so well. She looked like she was, at a certain point, I thought, okay, this is going to be a bagel and a breadstick sort of match. And next thing you know, it's, Rebecca has got a break point at 2-2 in the second set. And Krejcikova hits a serve out wide, aces her, and gets herself back into the match. And then everything just completely switched. The momentum completely changed. And I think what really changed, as we spoke to Krejcikova in the press conference, she said that she was reading the serve quite well in terms of knowing where to expect it based on the ball toss of Rebecca. Yeah. She also said she was guessing. Obviously, she was just throwing herself a lot of the time, just trying to guess. But the guesswork worked, and she just then started being a little bit more aggressive. She was coming into the net more. I think she won like 11 out of 15 points at the net throughout the match. She was really just trying to dictate the play. She wasn't giving Elena the time that she needs to sort of have to hit the winners that she usually does. Elena was really just trying to force herself to get the ball back into play, really, rather than dictating the match. And I was very impressed. Is it enough to beat the in-form player of the moment, the fan favourite, it seems? I mean, everyone seems to be from Italy now here at Wimbledon this year. Like Jasmine Paolini, she looks absolutely amazing. You watched her match. That was probably the match of the day, if not the women's match of the week. The longest ever semi-final here at Wimbledon. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was one of the best matches I've seen live in a stadium. Honestly, it was that good. And yeah, as you said, the longest Wimbledon semi-final in history on the ladies' side. And look, it didn't disappoint. I think at the start, it looked like it was going to one-way traffic. Vekic took the first set 6-2, looked so good, powerful. Someone in the crowd, just a spectator, turned around and said to me, she's kind of like Sharapova. And he wasn't wrong, because she was hitting, monster serves. Paolini, who's such a good returner, was struggling because Vekic was hitting her spots. You could see the puff of the white lines just coming up constantly from Vekic in the service game. She wasn't struggling on serve at all, really, in the first set. She was dominating with the forehand, flattening it out, just crunching it. And Paolini just looked so rushed. She said in a post-match press conference that she was struggling, obviously, with the pace. And she found it really, really tough. And then also, she wasn't serving well. Her first serve percentage was way down. She said after in the on-court interview that, look, I served terribly today. And that, to be fair, that did continue in the second and third set. But in the first set especially, she gave so many opportunities for Vekic. Second serve just in the middle of the box, somewhere at 70 miles an hour, right? And Vekic is just picking her off with return winners, putting on the back foot straight away. And Paolini was under so much pressure. I think there was only one game which she held to love, and it was in the third set. That's how much she was struggling on serve. And if we look at the stats, I'm pretty sure they'll say total points won in favour of Vekic, given it was a final set tiebreaker. But This is one of those matches that, you can talk a lot about stats with some matches and it makes sense. With this one, it was just more, you had to almost just sit there in awe and watch it because it was such a cat and mouse one. After the first set, the second and the third sets, there were multiple breaks, and Vekic, her first set percentage went down a little bit. Palini started to read her serve better. She started to get into the rallies, started to actually compete, I think, with Vekic, and Vekic started to miss a bit more. That was really the crux. She couldn't maintain that level in the first set. She played three-set matches beforehand. She came into this, I asked her after, and I said, look, you played now 4 3-set matches back to back. Was any fatigue involved, like in this match? And she said, look, I felt like I was going to die in the third set. That's what she said to me. She said, I felt like I was going to die in the third set. She said, my arms and legs were killing me. So she was in pain. She was in pain and she was playing through it. And there was a moment in the third set where there's moments throughout the second and third set where she'd win a point or lose a point and she'd literally stop at the net. She'd have her hands on the knees. She went to the crowd and went, please, please, like cheer for me, because she was in so much agony. Honestly, and it was great because she was playing into the crowd. The crowd loved Paolini, as you say. They absolutely love her. But actually, Donna had a lot of support as well. But it really came down to a couple of points. 10-8 in a final set tiebreaker. The tiebreaker, I think, was 6-all at one point. So it was super tight, 8-7, I think it was as well at one point. And look, there wasn't much in it. It was really just, I think Paolini was she's just slightly better physically, I think, towards the end. That might have helped. But also, I think she just played some of the points a bit better towards the end. She didn't take as many risks as Vekic, and the risks she did take were a bit more calculated. I think Vekic was still trying to go for the lines in moments where she probably shouldn't have. But that's kind of what her game is like, and that's why she had success in the match as a whole. So, look, it was a phenomenal match to watch, and I think maybe it was good that Paolini came out on top anyway. I think if Vekic made the final, maybe she would have had nothing left in the tank, honestly, hearing her talk after. But for Paolini, look, I mean, back-to-back Grand Slam finals, the first person to do it since Serena Williams. I mean, that's absolutely insane. And she said on court, look, if you'd said to me a month ago that you were going to make 2 Grand Slam finals, she said I would have called you crazy. And she's a fantastic personality. She gives a lot of time to us press as well, generally, and of course the Italians love her. As you said, she was the busiest presser of today by a country mile. And look, she's a great personality. The English crowd love her, and she just gives off great energy. She really does. So I'm looking forward to seeing what she can bring in the final, and obviously we'll preview that at another point, maybe probably tomorrow. But her versus Krejcikova was going to be an interesting one. I think we were thinking it was going to be her versus Rybakina, but she fought really well. She was a set and a breakdown in this one, Paolini. So the one thing you'll get from her is fight. She will fight, and she said after, look, I just kept on telling myself, just keep fighting, because at one point it looked like it was going to be a shutout, easy, and she just kept on fighting. She somehow got a break, and then she just kind of kept on building. She's the most tenacious player on the women's tour, I think, honestly. She's, yay high, and, she's a little pocket rocket, but she's a late bloomer as well. She's in her late 20s.
Yeah.
So she has kind of come from nowhere. And we talked to Krejcikova, and she said, look, I played qualies with her, what was it, in 2017 or something, they were saying? She first round of qualies, and she beat Paolini, and obviously, we think, Paolini's really young, but she's not. She's in her late 20s, right? So she's in her prime right now, and she's making the most of it. So let's see. It's going to be 2 girls going up against each other who have never played a Grand Slam final at Wimbledon, and it'll be a chance for them to win their first Wimbledon title. But yeah, we'll preview that at another occasion. Anything on your end that you want to talk about before we wrap up?
No, I mean I completely agree with everything you said, and I was checking when you were talking. Donna Vekic did win 7 more points than Paolini throughout the match. She also, she had nothing left in the tank. This is, something that I also noticed earlier in, the tournament when I spoke to her just before her Badosa match, after she had played Yamstrenka. She came into the room, and it was just me and her, and she came into the room and she looked exhausted. She said even coming up the stairs to come to the media center, she was just tired from that. And yeah, I mean, if you're playing the longest ever women's semi-final in Wimbledon history, after you've played so many free-set matches and have given everything on court already, it's always going to be tough. And the fact that it was only a couple points difference at the end of the tiebreak really shows that, you know what, it could have been Donna Vekic's day, wasn't to be today, maybe it will be in the future. But Paolini, as you said, was behind in the match the entire time. Every time I was looking at the score, she was trailing, she was fighting to stay in it, and she fought hard enough to get the win in the end. As you said, we will be previewing that tomorrow alongside the, obviously, men's final. Let's hope we're not eating our words of what we said today for Alcaraz and Djokovic. Obviously, we've predicted both of them to win. You said Alcaraz in 5, I've said Alcaraz in 4. You've said Djokovic, I believe, in 4, and I said Djokovic in 3 or 4. Let's hope we're not eating our words and sort of backing off what we said. But you know what? As long as we get good tennis, I think everyone is happy, regardless of the result. Any closing words before we head off, Faizan?
Look, at a Musetti Medvedev final wouldn't be that bad, to be honest. Honestly, Musetti's a pretty easy on the eye player to watch. So, I mean, look, it'll be great to get a repeat of the 2023 Wimbledon final. I think, if we were to get that, Djokovic would be so fired up, and we can obviously get into that in more detail if it does end up transpiring. But it's so exciting, I think. Obviously, the men's final coming up, and we know it's going to be a cracker, whoever's in it. The women's final, I think, is definitely unexpected, but it's good in a way because you have someone who's super experienced against someone who's not, and it can be a bit one-sided. I think this one we might get a 3-set match, we might get a close one, and that's always great to see. So let's see. It's been great to be here at Wimbledon. We've been very fortunate. Obviously, we've been rubbing shoulders with with the greats of the game right here. So I've been able to ask some questions, and yeah, more content to come. So guys, tune in, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, if you're listening on a podcast platform, which I'm sure lots of you are. Then also give us a follow as well. Thank you, Liam, and we'll catch you tomorrow after a long day. Hope you guys enjoyed this because we're recording this at like 10:30 p.m. So
yeah, thanks guys, and hope you enjoyed the podcast.